Yeah, you should go to the school.
I'll go to the
Got
school.
a ski can?
To the administrative office.
No, I only ski home getting.
There's,
Yep.
to the right.
Yep.
Oh,
My face is covered, so.
what state were you in? And it was freezing?
Snow was so gorgeous. It was just, snow was just
Chamber of Commerce, beautiful, fresh powder every day kind of experience.
gorgeous. Gorgeous. Yeah, I just skied Friday, and my daughter skied more days than that, but I just skied on Friday. It was enough. Just to prove I can still do it.
I think we're all evolving to just prove you can do it every year and move on. Yeah.
It was beautiful snow, though. Oh,
And which daughter? You went from California? Or?
all of them.
Oh, how nice.
I know. Yeah, but the daughter who skied a lot was the one who had a birthday.
Is it good?
Sarah. It's good.
She 22, 23? 22.
The other one just turned 23. She turned 26.
Oh. Getting there.
Good evening and welcome to this March 1st meeting of the Village of Lake Bluff Village Board of Trustees Committee of the Whole meeting. Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Yankovic? Trustee Hatch?
Here.
Trustee Marquis?
Here.
Trustee Rappin?
Here.
And Trustee Ryder?
Here.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is item 3 as non-agenda items and visitors for public comments. The Committee of the Whole allocates 15 minutes during this item for those individuals who would like the opportunity to address the Committee of the Whole on any matter not listed on the agenda. Each person addressing the Committee of the Whole is asked to limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. I see that we do not have many people tonight in our boardroom. Do we have anybody online willing to speak?
We do have one person attending virtually, and if that individual wanted to speak now, please raise your hand and you can be recognized. Doesn't appear so, sir.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, as number 4, general business. The Committee of the Whole will entertain requests from anyone present to modify the order of business to be conducted. Do we have any requests tonight?
No, sir.
Moving forward, next, item 4A, our consideration of the minutes from the February 13th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved?
Second.
Thank you. Any changes? Thank you. Clerk, please call the roll.
Voice vote.
A voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passed. Thank you very much. Passes. Thank you. Next is item 4B, Drew, as the information update and discussion regarding proposed stormwater utility committee engagement report.
Certainly, thank you. So following the village board's retreat late last year, the direction was to initiate public engagement with regards to the creation of a stormwater utility. That has been done in a variety of ways and through a variety of communication channels. The village sent a letter to every household from the village president regarding the proposed utility. The village's newsletter had a feature article on it. The e-newsletter has continuously included information about the stormwater utility since the direction was provided, and the village's website has contained information about it as well. On top of that, the village also held 3 public meetings, really, I would say largely focused at residents, but it did invite all property owners. We had, I would say, a good turnout of that, close to 50 folks over the 3 meetings, and people attending both in person and virtually. We did our best to distill the comments received at those meetings and received in writing from the various outreach mechanisms. The actual emails and one letter is attached in the back end of the packet. Hopefully you had a chance to see those. We also included minutes from the informational meetings, and again, tried to really distill it down to these, let's call them 5 major points that are highlighted in the memorandum to you all, and I'll go through those, and you guys can let me know how you want to proceed with each and one of these. I think that's probably the key points for tonight, and then the memo also highlighted kind of like what staff viewed as probably the next steps, presuming that the board was still interested in pursuing the utility after we get through the comments and working through those, is kind of refining a timeline, and then also kind of what I'll call finishing the community engagement process. So going back to the 5 major points that came out through the community engagement, the first one dealt with the credit system, and that is what we heard from folks is just from a high level, I think most people acknowledge there is a need to take on these improvements, and they acknowledged and understood, I would almost call it like a necessary evil was kind of the general feedback. And there was like, well, maybe you consider a refinement, and this was the reoccurring theme was the credit system. Right now, the village's program that has been developed and shared, it presumed a 50% credit if you were not contributing to the village's storm system in terms of stormwater runoff. And folks thought that's probably not robust enough in their mind, especially like if folks are up in Shore Acres or some other properties which may not have any public infrastructure. They thought it should be more in their mind. They understood it. They did acknowledge that there is benefit to their properties in some way, whether it's just I get around town with greater ease, public safety can reach me, kids can get to schools. I understand it. We do agree that there is some benefit, but until we get some infrastructure in our neighborhood, we think we should receive a more generous benefit. And then I would highlight one element of that was they would prefer it be given up front rather than have to go through a process to get to it. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. I'll a little bit later on too, based off a conversation I had today with Trustee Rappin, we did prepare a slide that shows if the village did increase the credit system to a 75% level, even to a 100% level, what that does for the overall fee system in terms of trying to satisfy the debt service, which is that $10 million note that we've been talking about all along, so we'll share that as well. The faster pace, interesting enough, there were a handful of people that came forward the meeting. Some had the courage enough to say it from their chair. Some came up afterwards and whispered it, but they said, hey, these numbers don't scare me. The fact, what scares me more is that this pace that you're looking at over such a long temporal period was too much. You know, condense it, do more sooner. Again, that was not a universal cry, but we heard it more than once. So that I throw that out there. The details, I think, you know, every group, I will say that the presenting body, which was Village President Charlot, Finance Committee Chair Ankerman, Bettina O'Connell, the Finance Director, Jeff Hansen, our consultant teams from Christopher Burke and myself, we're a learning organism. I think we got better and we listened to what were the feedback, and I say by the end, we did have some modifications. Some of the things that people thought from the very first meeting was that, oh, the village is going to look to spend $54 million in 10 years. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, you're going to destroy the village. It's going to be so torn up with it. It's like, how can you even get around? I'm like, no, it's not what we're talking about. So there were some comments like that. And some folks even, you know, we walked through the very first time the actual, how we went about determining the designations of the property and which bucket they got put in, and probably went quickly over that because we've heard it, talked about it a lot, and then we had to go back and we spent more time, each meeting spending more time going through that more thoroughly, and I think people understood it after we went through it, and we spent more time doing that, I think. So some of those details like that, some surprising, some not so, we got better at, I think, in the presentation. Another reoccurring theme was this idea that, you know, the village gets revenue from various sources. Some of those are constricted by state law, for example, property tax, the PTEL limitations. We can't go higher than CPI or the lesser of CPI or 5%. Folks were saying, wow, this is a fee structure. What stops the village board from raising this fee every year or with monthly? You know, there's no breaks on this. How do we stop this? And I think the response that the board members gave was, hey, we're up here paying this fee too. And ultimately, you can vote us out, right? If you think we're doing something that doesn't fit, that's but I think the general idea, we did have some sidebars later on amongst ourselves talking about maybe the village could commit to reviewing the fee structure every 5 years or some regular periodic time frame, or even freezing it associated with whatever that particular issuance was, is that, hey, we said it at the worst, it would be this amount, we told you that we're gonna hold it for that debt service and then do this fee or so forth. So those were talked about as ways to address that. So I think there's ways to handle that. The other information that people were pleased to hear was that the village has had some success in getting money from other agencies to help support this initiative. I think generally speaking, there was the concern that the state has not shown up yet, and Village President Charlo and I've talked about that. We're setting up meetings with our state reps very soon to talk about that. We met with, as he commented at Monday board meeting, we met with Congressman Schneider about it. And the county's been a great partner. But there's some important monies that are on the table still that we don't want to leave, and that I think truly the village is expecting to get a significant donation from the state, considering it's that viaduct, which is a big part of the deep tunnel project, is their asset. And we're expecting them to show up, and there's a lot of presumptions that they will. So that's something that this dedication, and make that crystal clear that the village is not going to stop lobbying for money. And I don't know why we would ever would, but again, just being crystal clear about that. So those are really the high-level comments, and if I missed something, please let me know.
The one thing I walked away from these 3 meetings is people never said no. It's always a yes. In some cases, is have you guys considered going faster? On the first 2 meetings, I gave a story that is I lived through stormwater, and I spent a lot of money to basically get that water out of my house, but guess what? That water went to the next house. And the reaction on the second meeting was, from a member of a community, was only big government can do that. And so it was encouraging. We are the only one able to resolve that issue, and we should go to it. It's a necessary evil, but we are committed to do that. This was the reaction of a community on that. And the last, what was surprising to me, I never heard no. I heard yes all the time, and I heard faster. And I think this is very encouraging. And that would be it.
Yeah. And the other thing we did, I should talk about here too, is the details. Some of the details was, I think we explained, we spent a lot of time this in the last meeting, was the village's approach to placing residential properties in buckets based on how their impervious surface is limited, and through a regulatory manner by saying, you're in the R4 district, so this is your fee, you're in the R3, this is your fee, and that versus going to the next level of going down to the very last stepping stone off their back patio and how much impervious surface. People understood that, and I think my general takeaway was they would rather the money go into capital versus administration of a program, even though there wasn't a desire to figure out that there are differences in certain properties. Your neighbor could have a lot more impervious surface and be in the same zoning district, and that there was kind of like, they were, the idea of continued refinement, I think, would be well received, but at the same time, they acknowledged that they didn't want to have an administratively heavy process, and would rather focus on putting pipes in the ground. So that's all the high-level comments. And again, unless you have any other to offer, Sharon?
Well, I do concur that probably the strongest pushback that we received was from people saying, but I need to have my credit because of I'm not as bad as they are.
Yeah.
And
Most of the time, they were, sorry to interrupt, but prefaced with selfishly, comma,
and the, yes, but the imperfect analogy that I made would be, well, my children have graduated from the school system, and I no longer am a burden and a draw on this educational system, so the largest part of my tax bill is for the schools. So why should I, as someone who's not benefiting from that still contribute to these schools? And the answer is because we live in a civilized society where we all value certain things, and together, just as Regis said, we can accomplish things with this larger body that we couldn't accomplish as individuals. And so I understand that I'm going to still be paying a property tax bill that is significant, and most of it is going to be going to the schools. And I'm okay with that because that makes Lake Bluff a better place. It makes Illinois a better place. It makes the world a better place. And so if people are concerned that their credit isn't quite large enough, I want to point to how the total impact on an annual basis is not very large. And if we chase the nickels and we chase the stepping stones and we chase all those things, then we're just going to price ourselves out of being reasonable. And our staff has a lot of important things to do, and I don't think that's the highest and best use of their time. So we have to find something that's administratively more elegant, that does have equity in mind, but also is also something that we can not have to continue to watch every little stepping stone and give this person their $5 because now we're spending $100 administratively to do that. So that was my big.
And to that point, if I may, I'm gonna share my screen and show you some of the differences between the different levels of credit application, between a 50% level, which we've talked about so far, a 75% level, and surprisingly, the nominal difference it makes. And the idea, like, getting down to the last stone, is that worth the, is that juice worth the squeeze, as they say? Give me 1 second. So this is the current program that we've shared at the meetings with the residents, and we'll just go to let's just take R4 since there's a lot of units in that. Well, actually, we'll go to R3 since it's the greatest number, the 3,200, 3,300 or so units. So that fee, assuming a 50% credit for properties that are not contributing. And Jeff, if you want to come up, we can talk about this a little bit. But if you look at that fee schedule, then you go to 75% level, more money, but it's not a huge difference.
Can you, that middle one, 93 versus, so it's an extra $53,000, or 47?
No, the goal, again, we're backfill, trying to get to that debt service level. So just massaging these numbers just enough to get there. You can see, if I example, I'm
The
looking
credit
at.
grows from 93 to 140.
40, yep.
And that 953 still covers the debt service?
Yes, all these models do that you see, but then it goes up to 100%. You can see the difference. And I'm really pointing at the average annual fee per parcel. A homeowner would see that number, and there's not a great degree of difference.
No.
We're basing this off $182 for one ERU for 50% credit. That would go up $8 to $190 if it was a 75% credit, and $198 if it was 100% credit. So average $8 for each one of these steps.
Good. I mean, my sense is that we are a community and everybody should pitch in for this. For those who are not affected by this, I don't think we should go down to 0, maybe 25%, so that they have some skin in the game as part of our community. But that's just I'm just throwing out an idea. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I agree with that. Like, I guess I feel like speaking as to what Barbara said and what you're saying, just because you don't have kids in the school district anymore, doesn't mean you don't want the schools to be run and to be good, because it benefits our community, benefits the value of your home, it benefits a lot of different things. So I think that infrastructure in the town is the same thing. We're still using the same roads. We still have to go through the viaduct. We still have to get around town, and it impacts your home value. It impacts your quality of life. So I would think that, everyone should have a little skin in the game on this.
And from my perspective, 50% seems like the appropriate skin in the game. I'd love to have a 50% credit on my education bill right now, my tax bill.
I'd be fine with that too. I'm not, yeah.
So from my perspective, it balances the interests, though you could probably make the same argument for 75%, but it seems to me, those very reasons, the analogy that Barbara drew, 50% seems like the appropriate credit from my perspective.
We even talked about, I'm sorry, at staff level, we talked about, is there legally, and we checked this too, you could do a flat fee to assume that everybody values, this, there's going to be benefit for all at some level, and then you have the variable level could be, and we looked at doing that, but we
Yeah.
started talking about it, it's like, well, at the end of the day, we're still backing in the same number, and
Yeah.
if this is only moving it, 10, 20 bucks, it's like,
Right.
does that make sense?
Like everybody pays $100. just
Yes, a flat fee
A
plus.
flat fee, and then depending on your zone, you
Situation,
pay
yeah.
some, or
Yeah.
whatever.
So can I make just a comment about the
Yeah.
credit? So the way that, and I think I've mentioned this before, the way the courts analyze these stormwater fees, or any fee system, but these stormwater fees there's been cases, this credit issue gets important because they get challenged because someone says, I don't contribute anything, and a fee, as opposed to a tax, is supposed to be for services rendered. Tax, it doesn't matter what you give, you can just take. A fee is an exchange. And so somebody will say, maybe not here, but others have, I'm not contributing a drop to the stormwater system, so I shouldn't have to pay anything. That's clearly not the law. The farther you get away from zero, then the stronger that person's argument will be that, hey, I'm paying 50, I'm just throwing 50%
Yeah.
out for, the case we have right now in Peoria, they get down to 10%. In other words, all the credits you can get, you may end up paying 10% of the fee. And we're arguing that that's totally fine, for the same reason you just said, and that you just said, that it's everybody's system. Even if you're not directly putting into it, you benefit from it, and all the reasons you said. But there's no court case on that. There's no court case that says what's the right credit number. I can defend 50% too. I just wanted to put out there that the farther you get away from zero, the stronger that argument could be if it ever gets to a court.
And Peter, if you're talking about Peoria, which is substantially larger than Lake Bluff, would that impact a court's decision on whether or not that argument has legs?
Yeah, I think, but maybe only if one of them is better situated to argue that everybody's benefiting from the system. So does that mean a smaller system is easier to make that argument, or is it a big, I don't know. I think both can make the argument pretty well.
Do you say how many residents of the village never go under the viaduct? I mean,
Right.
it's like, that's the
That's
biggest.
the actual.
Right, and how many would need to cross that in an emergency,
All of those things are true.
I mean, there's an argument that was partly made by you, Barb, and by Joy, that is, we pay to a system, this is a government thing, this is only a thing we can do as a group. There is an intangible here that is, and a perception that is, once we get that work done, we will have a drier community, that will raise the value of our community and the value of our homes. So even though I might be outside the system, I will still benefit by my house gaining value as that intangible. So I actually think that, no, you will always benefit from that system, even though you might be on the fringe of Lake Bluff.
So one of the things to talk about, when we started our program, we took that 50% credit from Libertyville. Right? That they were using, their close community, that's what they use,
What was the credit again?
50%. And that's what we've started with, and that's what we've been working with. And we talked about Winnetka, and Jeff, we were looking at earlier, Winnetka's system, and Peter, you're probably very familiar with that. Their credits,
No, I forgot. We just talked about this about an hour ago.
Winnetka, you can get down to zero.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you have a system that gets everything off, you can
Yeah.
get down to zero.
Yeah, so there's my point is there's a range, right? People are.
But that's the question. If, let's talk about 50%. Is it, I don't contribute anything, so I should get 50? Or are there gradients of that? Like, I mean, and I know it's administratively a headache once you get into that. but-
All the policies I've seen, it's either all or nothing. Either you contribute or you don't. So even a house maybe on the lake that most of their water goes off, down a pipe to the lake, but their front yard kind of tips to the front, they would pay.
And we talked about that today when we were doing this. It's like, you could do great. I mean, you could put people in buckets, but then it gets to the point where like,
Administratively, it's very difficult.
well, we're back to doing, and we're,
Yeah.
it's, to what end?
Has Libertyville had any lawsuits regarding?
Not to my knowledge.
That I know of.
And are you aware, and maybe your work representing Peoria, has there been any other challenges to stormwater utilities within the state of Illinois?
Not in court, I mean, I would only know the ones that are in court.
Yeah.
and We've handled both of them. One was Winnetka, and now it's Peoria. But again, Winnetka got down to 0. Peoria started, I think Peoria started at 40% was the minimum you would be required to pay. And then they came down further, so.
Well, it looks like the difference between 50% and 25% is $4 for the average household. Probably makes sense to be at 25, a little bit closer to 0. I'll throw that out.
I'm fine with 50%, just putting it out there for all the same reasons stated. I'm confident in Peter's ability to defend us. And when you're talking about such a small nominal amount, I think that actually strengthens our argument.
One of the other relevant questions was whether or not it was incumbent upon the person to come seek the credit or automatically granted. I guess we're saying you need to come seek the credit. It's, I don't know which way that cuts, but is that typical, like, of these other
Well,
cities that have it?
I have to say, that's one thing that people talked about, well, how do I do it, and what's and I thought to myself, we already know the properties that theoretically could do it. Why don't we just, again, administratively take care of that? And it should make the residents feel happier that the burden isn't being placed upon them to do yet one more thing, one more form, one more, did I check every box, or I did all the work, but I still don't get the credit. I think if we could take that away, it is a benefit that helps it more. Speak good.
Well, it does, it's like a good faith, like, and on top of it, I bet that is less of an administrative headache for our staff who would otherwise have to go through each request.
We've had a conversation about that. Do you want to?
I don't know of any that just don't require an application.
Right.
One of the issues is I don't know every parcel in the village and how it drains, and I don't know that we can administratively examine. I mean, you don't have to look at them all, because obviously the whole east side in a box, goes to our system, but there is a fear that you would miss some, and people come 5 years later, you've been billing me because you didn't figure out, my property. We can make the application very simple. I don't know if you've seen our building permit application, but it's one piece of paper to build a house or to, repair a pipe. It's the same one little piece of paper with 10 pieces of information on it. I would anticipate helping a lot of people with them, but it would be challenging to identify every parcel and every property. And there are some properties that I've never been to. There's some in the business park and like the DeMarie along 41 that I don't have a really good knowledge of offhand. So I think that would be a challenge to identify each one.
So I guess what I was thinking of is if we require people to apply rather than the presumption being the opposite way, then maybe more of a discount, a credit makes sense. If we're going to go out and bestow it, and then perhaps the 50-50 makes more sense. I guess I'm trying to talk myself into where we might end up at 25, 75% credit. And we are, requiring the homeowner to come seek out the credit and the point that you make about it being a fee for service rather than a tax makes some amount of sense to me. So I'm now going back on my 50-50 is right to more like, I think we keep the burden on the homeowner to apply for the credit. I do think that that makes sense for the reasons you're stating. But I could go down to up to a 75% credit, down to 25%. On the theory that, people need to take that proactive action themselves and be able to show it. And we get closer to the fee-for-service concept than a tax concept, I guess, that way.
Just so I'm clear, are you suggesting a two-step for properties that the village may be aware of, but we would do an initial 50%?
No,
saying
no,
you
no,
can
no,
get
no,
it-
no,
oh,
no, I'm
okay.
just saying,
Okay.
balancing the equities here.
I see.
We are requiring people to come forward. That's an administrative burden we've decided not to remove from the homeowner. Maybe that's a reason to go to the 75% credit rather than just the 50% credit. You're hearing my thought process.
So just to be clear, you're saying 100% of people have to apply for the credit, and that credit would be a 75% credit?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That's, initially 50-50 made sense to me, but I hadn't understood the fee-for-service concept, which also makes sense to me, is different than a tax for a public school.
Is it a one-time application, or does the application, do you have to renew it every year?
There are, most programs require renewal. I don't think we need to do that here. Anytime, say somebody subdivides or, changes property, we might,
Right.
I mean, those are kind of the details that haven't necessarily been written yet. But I don't think I would need to see the same thing every 3 years or 5 years, from the same properties, which are never going to change.
Jeff, what would be the process? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I guess I feel like, to me, that's not a huge onus on a property owner, then if you're only doing it once every
Right.
3 years or 5 years. I mean, they would have to come in and fill out the form, or maybe they could do it online. We could do it easily online. But I don't feel like that's a huge, I guess I just don't feel like that's I feel like property owners could manage that.
Yeah.
Without a problem. I don't know if it means we should give them 75%.
Yeah.
Those two things
Okay.
we don't.
They don't
correlate.
really
Yeah.
go together. I'm
Yeah,
trying to-
just my personal, it doesn't seem like it's that much of a burden.
And if you did have to renew it, I think we would probably just mail you the application, say, hey, this is
Yeah.
up in
Yeah.
October or whenever it is. Please submit this form if you want to continue getting credit.
I have a question on that process because it's an application that probably requires a review. And so there might be an approval or a denial at the end of that review. Would there be an appeal process? I mean, what have you thought
Probably.
about that?
Probably.
The draft ordinance that we looked at, I think in September, had an appeal process. Basically, I think I was the first step, Drew was the second, and the board third.
Got it.
So have we done the math of what, if we were 75 versus 50%, what we stand to gain? I mean, I guess what I'm trying, yeah. So, right, so to me, this is a massive amount of money that we need, and that $40,000 makes an impact. Whereas if it's $4 here and there to the individual, where you don't really feel that pinch, but the community really needs it. I'm also more comfortable with keeping it at 50%. I just don't think it's that big of a burden.
And I
What-
think
what-
Libertyville is a
Right.
illustration.
What I would say is, prior to me being involved in local government, I was very uncomfortable with, if I want to do a project, what do I do next? Meaning, the easy form, I felt like I wouldn't know how to start. So maybe it really needs to be us focusing on messaging and communication and making that application widespread, understood and known. I don't know, maybe it even is a mailer,
Yeah,
right out the gate.
I was asking Bettina about, can we do it where a resident can interface at home on a website and do it, like, click these if
Yeah.
this, then this, if this, then here's your new utility bill,
Right.
So, but, yeah, understood is, how can we make this as simplistic and easy for everybody?
Right.
So that would be the goal. But, yeah, there was no easy button. She
Saying
was
no.
not.
Not even an automatic mailer, like where we mail out the application?
That can be done.
So that gets
Yeah.
in people's
water
hands?
bill.
Right.
I'm trying to think, if we just point to somebody on the website, here, do this and submit an email, right? I'm just trying to, how can we make this where they don't have to leave, even go to their mailbox, right? Short of
But that means people need to be reading or going to the website, you know, like
Right.
something to trigger, like, oh, this is a thing that I can do. I can go do that now.
We
But
could do a mailer with a QR code, and then they can just scan it with their phone.
Yeah. Yep.
Boom.
yeah,
And that's actually a good question, because how many people do receive the email in town? And what's the mechanism for covering the rest of the population that doesn't see those emails? And so there might be the possibility to put placards at the entrance of a village, the three entrances we have, where we could actually say, okay, this is your application for X, and this is where you could go.
That's a silly comment. Why don't you just include something in the first bill?
Well, we can-
Going to everyone, they're all
right.
getting their
I mean, we
bills
can-
on there. Oh,
I
look,
think
here's
the general-
information if you disagree.
All right,
That was a.
And you've
yes,
reached everyone,
that's-
because they're going to open their bill.
I think there's the idea of
Eventually.
explaining people, you're going to be getting a bill, this is what it's gonna happen. You know, so I think we go back to what has worked here historically is the same thing we did before, a letter to the household, e-news, I mean, these things work, people respond, you see, even like the emails, I saw this in the newsletter, or I heard this, you know, so I think we just do the same steps that we followed before. Because everybody receives information differently, and so.
Regis, did you want to cover these 5 main topics? How did you want to?
We should. And the next topic being the faster pace.
The rhythm, yeah.
yeah.
So right now, this is, I don't remember exactly the number, but should we consider raising that fee to achieve work faster?
So in order to answer that question, I need to understand what this pace would get
Half a
us.
century.
That's what I thought. Yes, we need to do it faster.
Half a century just from the credit.
Just from the
The
credits.
credit,
Before any other grants or,
Okay, 25 years then. We still need to do it faster,
so.
don't we?
Well, let me say this, it's, Winnetka took 10 years to get the establishment of the stormwater fee, building up, educating, going through the process of negotiating with Cook County, the new school
but-
district.
Yes, but all the things you just said were a big part of that delay, not the stormwater fee.
But the idea of going, because they had to find places to put stormwater, because they were gonna retain it, but so it was and that's just half the town, right? That's just the west side of town, that's not even the east side of town.
Right.
So, but that is I wanna say, that's an aggressive, that's a 10-year build-out to do that infrastructure. Other towns, like Libertyville's pace is
Well, they're identified for 20 years, I think.
20 years worth of projects down to the dollar, which we kind of snickered about. No, sorry, Libertyville. But it's like, how are you going to know what that is 15 years from now? You know, I think the village will have the ability and to maybe a safer maybe approach is to say, we acknowledge we may want to go faster and we may have to, but there's the idea of what can the village really do from a capacity in terms of staff. What are you willing to spend?
Yeah.
Because even this rollout, we would likely, at the end of the day, we're gonna bring on some professionals to help through the transition of managing the credit applications, because we're probably talking, we'll get 1,000 of them,
I
let's
hope
say.
not.
Yeah.
Right?
There'd be maybe 100 parcels. I mean, if you look at the chart too, you see that almost all the credit dollars go to the commercial and industrial areas. There's not,
Right.
that's where I
Yeah.
bit my tongue a little. You said mail them to every resident
Yeah.
because everybody would just sign it and send it back. And
There might
to
be a
sort through
perception, a discussion perception that is slightly different. It's not so much that we're going to do the whole thing in 50 years. I think people said, can you go faster when after people said, so when are you going to dig? When are you going to start the digging part? And Drew, you said in that first meeting.
We're 18 months away from sticking a shovel in the ground.
And it's going to be really, you're going to see that street destroyed in 3 to 5 years. I think
It would be
you said.
3-year, the deep tunnel alone is about a 3-year project.
And then they said, but then we're going to start only that in 2 years from now. And people said, well, if we pay more, can you guys go faster? And so it's not the 50 years, the total time, but how long will it take to do that deep tunnel? But people were still willing to pay more to go faster.
Yeah.
So there's, to your point, trustee Ryder, so there is the deep tunnel project, which could be done, assuming the state participation as part of this front part, right? That'll take a while to do, but that doesn't stop. If you remember, the village's level investment in stormwater infrastructure at amount of about $400,000 a year, that wouldn't stop, right? So the idea the village could be picking off project straws into this, we can start chipping away. But I mean, this is probably close to a 50-year plan. I mean, that's still true. You're still doing more than just, do a project, wait 15 years, do another it's like you're still adding into you're chipping away, there's progress. It's just to complete this list, it's a long time.
But this first phase with the deep tunnel is going to take every bit of this village's 3 years plus. There always can be a decision sometime after that started to now we want to accelerate or come up with another solution. Yes. And if you bring up, do you have the average cost for all of the communities? Because aren't we right now in line with the annual of most communities? And if we did something more aggressive, we'd be very much of an outlier, wouldn't we?
So like Winnetka, I talked to their village manager, and I think they kind of designed this at a rate, which is, you see where it is, that they didn't want to go back and talk about it again. They wanted to set a rate for a long time and to hold on to that rate for most of the lives of the people that were sitting around the room at the time.
So what did they commit to? No, what is the period in which they committed to that rate? Or did they not? They just said this is the rate?
That's the rate.
That's
End
the
of
rate.
story.
And they set that.
But they said they would never revise?
That was their intentions.
Yeah,
That they went.
They still have the ability.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Winnetka's different than Lake Bluff, because Winnetka, the plan was established, the project that everybody thought was going to happen when the plan was established never happened. They pivoted off that project and did another, and they pivoted fast. And so they're doing everything that Drew said within this 10-year period. But they had to pivot away from a project. It turned out that the estimates were
It was much more expensive,
like
right?
$100 million more
And that's the
expensive.
east side, right?
Right.
Which is still to be solved.
Wow.
No, but it was to build a pipe
A deep
from
tunnel, yeah.
from western Winnetka to a new outfall into Lake Michigan, right down Tower Road, and the estimates were just way off, but now they're doing a bunch of projects to accomplish the same thing.
Isn't one of the goals of putting this utility together, the fee together, is that we have a dedicated stream so we can show the state, and we can show other funding sources that we have some skin in the game. So my assumption would be, as we're putting money in to pay this debt service that we've taken out from the $10 million, that our hope is then that we can bring other partners in that will give us more money so that we can move along a little faster. I don't know that we need to put all the onus on our residents. I feel like we maybe had 45 people in those meetings. We haven't really heard from a lot of residents. And while some of them were saying, let's move faster, I'm sure there's residents, especially like when we talk about older residents that want to stay in this community, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we're not the only taxing body asking for money, right? We've got the schools and we've got the park district. And so I think we need to be reasonable about how much we're actually asking for in the hopes that we can get a match. I know everybody wants to move faster, but I think I've learned just from being on the board for so many years that sometimes you just can't move faster. You're waiting for something from IDOT, or you're waiting for a study, or you're waiting, and it just takes a long time, like the Green Bay Road, the bridge. I mean, it just takes a long time sometimes, and so if we can be doing these little one-off projects with the $400,000 we already have budgeted, then we can use this and we can just continually work away at it. But I think to be realistic, we do have some things that we cannot actually control in that situation, and I don't know that dumping more money into it will make a huge difference.
Well, looking at the numbers, it really doesn't make a huge difference. If you added $110 and you were at Winnetka's level, it allows you to borrow another $5 million. It may take us from 50 years to something less, but it doesn't. We still need a lot of outside sources to solve our problem. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, we are organizing that stream of money to have our own contribution and outside sources that might be county and the state and the feds. One thing we had a discussion after, the two of us had a discussion after this meeting, and we were talking about going faster. And the point was, people were asking for, can you go faster doing that deep tunnel? And the point is, we have imponderables, things that you just cannot speed up, that is land acquisition and so on. And the analogy I made to Drew is in software engineering, there are things that you just cannot go faster. And for example, we always say we just cannot make a baby in 1 month with nine moms. Okay? Okay, I wasn't clear, but basically, we cannot speed up the how can I say that better? It doesn't take.
Just say it in French.
No.
We'll all go, yeah.
It'll sound so much more better.
We cannot make a baby in 1 month with 9 women. Okay, this is it. There is for this project management, there is a time you just cannot compress, and raising the fee might be very nice, but it might not be helpful. To your point, and we have to be sensitive to the need of a population as well. I completely agree with you, but we also need to go and execute this project. And maybe what we have today is maybe the fine line we're looking for.
Speaking of waiting, I mean, this is insight, probably way much into too far in the weeds, but forgive me. It's just really interesting, but it's insightful into what we face going through this project. We have to do a phase 1 because we may want to, we're doing that phase 1 for the deep tunnel because we're looking for state or federal funding. We may have to follow all of their rules. So along the way, we're doing that. And part of the rules talk about potential impact to historical properties. So Jeff, do you want to tell the horror story?
Yeah, putting curb on East North Avenue could be an impact to historical properties because it changes the way they look from the street. So that
A curb.
probably is fine, but it has to go through the clearinghouse in Springfield, and that's probably a 3-month wait for them to say it's okay to put a curb in front of somebody's house that is not on the historic register, but is eligible. Could be in the future on the historic
So
register.
90 days and how many consulting hours, but it's just something that we have to address as part of the project. To making it a simple improvement is putting a curb on an asphalt road.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. The correct saying is 9 women cannot make a baby in 1 month.
9
Yes, that's
women
the
cannot make
correctly.
a baby in 1 month. I heard it that time. I have not either.
I have not heard.
Sorry about the bad English before.
That's the punchline. I think the lead up is something about programmers. I don't know.
That should not,
Sorry.
and 9 men can
So
never
from
make.
a,
Years.
Fair enough. Does 50 years.
so guys, get focused. So from a faster pace
Okay.
standpoint, well, it would be very nice. I don't think we can get faster. Jeff, what do you think? Can you push the timeline?
The deep tunnel, it depends if we have a request into the county for 2.7 more million. It's possible we could get out of the ravine and up East North Avenue without needing federal funding. Then we could take some of these studies that we're doing to make it eligible for that portion away and push that a little faster, but you're talking months. I mean, in the overall $50 million scheme of projects, the time that you could go faster would be after the deep tunnel is done, and maybe you're only investing the $400,000 a year or less. You could do more in that interim period while you're paying the debt if you had more funds, but I think the deep tunnel, I mean, it's plus or minus 9 to 12 months, no matter what you do at this point.
But even like trying to solve some of the terrace issues, the flooding on Pine and so forth, from a timing perspective, because you're working east to west, do you have to wait till the pipe's all the way in before you begin working west to east again or east to west again?
You don't necessarily have to. I mean, you could have 2 projects working towards each
Right,
other.
you don't want to
if
miss
It's a lot of
coordination. Yeah.
coordinate. It's a lot of construction,
Yeah.
and that always causes problems. But you could, if you had more, you could start in the East Terrace while you're working your way back to the viaduct from the lake and meet in the middle.
So that's the pace issue. So then the details.
So this is a communication issue, right? An education issue to our community.
So, Drew, you're probably the best person to answer this, or Jeff. What details did you hear that people were asking for, and can you provide them?
There was a criticism that the village assumed that residents didn't understand what we're really talking about and some of the math and explaining it. There was an engineer who called me up and said, I understand this, you don't have to, I'm not a fifth grader. I'm like, okay, great. But so the idea of getting into some more of the details, getting in the nitty gritty of the calculations, how we did it, how we're gonna do the commercial properties, explaining that, writing it out, we can do it, and it's just taking the time to do it.
And your commitment was to expand on our website, on the village, to basically post that
The
information.
FAQs, add some more to the FAQ list, refine that list.
And once you provided that feedback to the people who were in the room, it was great, thank you very much, next. It was not an issue, but I think we need to be sensitive to the needs of education, to the education we can provide, and be completely open and transparent, and it will be just fine.
Some of these details there's a legal question, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Peter Freeman about this, but like the idea of including the UP Railroad property in these, I don't know what Winnetka did, but ultimately I presume the UP would put that back to us as a tenant. They would work somehow, we would end up holding those fees. for some of
There's nothing legally that would prevent us from applying it.
And then the question came up with HOA properties that were common areas. How would the village handle that? And our answer in the meeting was, well, right now, if they're improved, then we're counting them. If they're unimproved, then we wouldn't count them. That's what we've talked about.
I have a question, but it takes us back, so I'm gonna wait until.
Well, those were some of the main details that even came up. Those were the
So I
legal
haven't-
ones.
So, Drew, do you feel that in the FAQs you can address the spirit of what people were asking for?
Yes.
Okay.
And where are they found? Are they on the website now?
Yes.
Are they, do you know where they're at? I'm just looking at the website.
Yep, if you go to the front page, there's one of those landing, right
There it
there.
is?
Click on that,
Okay.
and there it is. You go down, the drop-down menus.
Gotcha.
Can you go back to the ERU page?
This one?
So here's something I should have asked a long time ago. Maybe there's a simple answer. No, the one prior. Is a parcel is a parcel? If you're in an R4, does it matter whether or not you have 0.37 acres or 0.19 acres?
You're getting close to something I had written down that I was hoping you guys would talk about.
Because
For some,
Double lots or?
double lots, or maybe one lot is unimproved, or maybe you just have one really, really big lot because they've been merged over the years, or is that, and why are we defining it by parcel rather than by acreage?
mostly for simplicity, if you do it by acreage, the thought was that by the zoning district, most lots are similar in size and similar in what you can build. There are, and that was one of my questions I was hoping you guys would talk about, like there's some wonky lots on the east side that are remnants of 6 different parcels and there's one house. There are some double lots with one larger house on them, and those are kind of some fine details that do need to be figured out. Simply doing it by acreage would likely penalize people who have small houses on big properties.
Yes.
So a zoning lot, right, unless it's being pursued to subdivide for development purposes, we treat them, you could have multiple pins tied to one zoning lot. We treat that as a zoning lot. So that's how so you could have a very large zoning lot, mostly unimproved or improved, but there's going to be outliers like you're thinking of.
Because if you do this, I mean, if you're doing averages, there's going to be some above it and some below it.
Right.
That seems more significant to me than the difference in impervious surface, the adding. Okay, if everybody else is fine with it, I'll get over it, but I'm just
I'm fine
looking
with
at
it.
the east side.
I'm fine
There
with
has to
it.
be a level of simplicity to it.
Exactly.
But
All right, so what,
if, just on that point, you're right. If it's the same analysis. So somebody who wants to, challenge this would say, hey, my lot is way below the average. So I'm not getting And we would rely on the courts, they say it doesn't have to be scientific exactitude on these fees. It's just got to, be a reasonable so, there's no case that says this is okay. A lot of other towns do it this way. We would have to make the same argument.
And if you
the same-
remember the conversation, there's communities with flat fees, right? This is your fee.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, which I understand too. So if you have two lots, you pay two different PIN numbers, but one's unimproved, you don't pay a fee for that one because you only have one house on one of the two lots?
You're paying whatever the average based on the ERUs.
For one lot or two lots?
Two lots, right?
Two lots, even if the second one is unimproved.
I think so.
So how does that answer, the HOA comment that you just made
I
made
know, I
me
know.
think about this. So how does that apply to the HOAs?
There are some double lots where only one is improved. There are some double lots where the house spans the lot. When we try to encourage people to consolidate their property if there's a reason to, but yeah, there are a lot of oddballs that.
That comment is important because in some cases you have two numbers, tax numbers at the county level.
Yeah.
This is one lot. Do you pay twice or do you pay once?
That is a detail that has not been fully fleshed out yet.
I think
But this math is based off the zoning lot.
This is based off of parcels, which is mostly zoning lots, but
Is a tax ID?
there is, until you go through each lot
Yeah.
individually, there's always, this is a light dive right now, and those numbers will change, somewhat as we get further into it, but
Well, so I guess we can for the direction necessary, if the board's direction at the end of this conversation is to, let's figure that out and take this to the finish line, we can go do that with the general direction that has been consistent thus far, which was, trying to equity, ease of
Simplicity.
administration, all that headlines. We can work through that and come back to you saying, here's what we recommend.
I think this is good.
Yeah.
Equity and ease of administration. What are you going to discover behind that makes your life more difficult or equitable for our community?
some parcels are made with multiple pins just for reasons of history. In some cases, people have bought their neighbor's house and torn it down to build themselves a bigger house. I don't know if we want to look at that. It's more of a double payment because they've actually using both lots. But like I know there are some, particularly on the east side, that are very, very
Really weird.
strange.
One house on 4 lots I'm looking at right now.
I think I know where you're looking.
And I think we could do that in a way like we do impact fees, right? You're treating this as one lot now. We're gonna treat it as one lot now. When you subdivide that and create another lot, then there's gonna be a new fee added.
Okay.
I'm
That
just
makes
gonna
sense.
say too, like, I don't, like, at some point, I don't
Because
really
there's a
wanna.
fee, right? You're generating,
Let's talk about the fee governor.
Can I just wanted to add something. When it comes to the fee structure, I wouldn't be comfortable voting on something until I knew the actual, like, the permanent fee structure of what we were doing. So when we say, oh, these numbers are massageable, we can move these around, like, when it comes to us in its final form and we're actually voting on it to create it, I want to actually see the numbers we're going to be charging people. I might not be here, but
No, I agree with you. And
I think it's only fair to residents that we actually can say to them with some certainty, these are the numbers that you'll be seeing.
and so-
Within
Joey.
some range, don't you think? I mean, if we say 182 and when they pay 193,
Right, I mean, I don't want to see 178 here, and then on their tax bill, they see 225.
So I think the point here, both of you are absolutely correct. We will give a direction to Drew and Jeff are going to come with precise numbers, and we will either argue against it or for it, but we'll vote on precise numbers, right?
yes.
Okay.
It could be easiest to give you a number and like maybe we guess a little high and then bring it down a little if possible. But there is some engineering that will, if we're still trying to hold that level of revenue, I think there's a contract, because that CBEL contract is in the packet. That's one of the things that we will need to have the consultant do some work to, if we're going to drill it down, to the dollar.
Okay, I mean, this is,
But we can
yes.
certainly do that. That's not,
I think we need
I think
to,
that's what we expected to do, is that, I mean,
Yeah.
yes.
right, I mean, to Joyce, ask, yes, we need to do that, but we need to make our mind on what we want to achieve. And then we basically, you guys get a chance to, be specific, and then we'll see that and we'll vote on it and we'll make it force of law.
So Drew, on the fee governor, can you kind of frame it up for us on how we should be thinking about that?
Yeah, again, I commented earlier on, I think the residents that had concerns about this was just looking for something reasonable that they could not expect us to increase on a regular basis. You know, that you institute a fee, you have a program, how can we keep this as flat as possible for as long as time as possible?
And, we've talked about a number of ways that it could be tied to the length of the bond issue. But here's my thought. I think that once we get that first phase really under our belt, it may be in a perfect world, let's say 5 years, that first deep tunnel project is done, and we can see what it takes staff to accomplish that, what kind of tolerance the community has for things being torn up, and we kind of just see how that all works. Is 5 years a good enough time frame that we can then say, oh, we're adding another faster element of getting this done? So if we say we're gonna tie it to just the life of the bond, and that's 10, 15 years, we're really not being able to be nimble. We're not able to learn from what we just experienced and do something else. And so we can't be as fast as, a business, but perhaps we need to be a little bit more nimble than the life of the whole bond. Maybe it's something like, I pick out 5 years because I think, okay, let's take what we think is an average lifespan of getting this done, given some barriers that are gonna be unforeseen, and, it's gonna take 3 years and blah, blah, blah. At 5 years, I think we're gonna learn a lot. We're gonna know a lot. We're gonna be able to say, okay, we've maxed out. We can't handle it staff-wise. We can't handle it in terms of traffic. We can't, maybe we're just set. We're not going to change it, but maybe we'll have a different decision. And so I feel like I totally agree that we need to say with some confidence, here is a reasonable period for which it will not change, and it shouldn't be annually. It shouldn't be 2 years. It shouldn't even be 3 years. Maybe 5 years would be the shortest period, because I think we can then be, again, more nimble, more able to respond to market conditions, to what we've found to be true. A new way might have occurred, watching some other municipality do what they're doing. Oh, wow, we could have done that. We didn't even know that was a way to help make this happen faster. So I just wanted to put out there that I think it totally makes sense to set it for a period of time. Our residents want to be able to expect it. I think it might be as short as 5 years, or it might be the life of the bond.
So if there was the idea of no more than CPI for the first 5 years, is that, or you think it's
No,
flat and it
no,
doesn't
flat.
change at all?
I'm saying flat for a significant period of time, like 5 years. And then a lot of things are going to happen. We're going to learn a lot. The world is going to, go to war, or whatever it's going to, we're going to learn a lot.
Barb, I think that question came about when people said, what prevents you guys from raising that fee? Okay, that was the idea. And Drew answered, well, nothing. Other boards might actually come around and say, no, we will raise that. But what has made the difference in the past is that boards have honored what was said in the past. Not that the future will keep it the same way. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, we were talking about the PTEL limits, is that when the village became home rule.
Yes.
They said, yeah, now you won't have any official governor on how much you can tax us. And they said, that's true, but we will pledge to you that people who sit up here will not raise it any more than 5% for PTEL. We'll hold to that.
And
And if,
That's why I'm saying that
Yeah.
maybe we don't want to hamstring ourselves forever because there's unforeseen world circumstances. But to say for X period of time, I think might put residents at ease
sure.
for this is a reasonable it's a reasonable ask, gives us the ability to execute the plan, not start something and be completely unable to finish it, right?
And so the question, and I completely agree with you, by the way, and so the question for Drew and Peter is, given that this is a fee, what are we constrained to on that fee, and how can we assuage residents' fear, and what can we put in that construct, that fee, a thing that would be a PTEL type equivalent?
I'm also trying to think about if I'm a bond attorney, are they gonna want any kind of throttle on the ability, right? They're not.
No, I wouldn't, I mean, the way that the home rule was, I think it was in the recitals of a resolution, if I recall. So it wasn't in the actual, I wouldn't want to put that in the actual code, but it can be in the recitals. You can say it on the record. It can be reflected in the minutes. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to.
Right,
State
I'm not asking, my question wasn't asking what administratively is the way that we make this come into effect, although I appreciate that point, it's very important. I was just bringing out, I think when we talk about trying to have residents feel comfortable, that I think we need to pick a time period that represents what would work for us being able to still have the wherewithal to finish what we started.
So that issue, I don't think impacts anybody's challenge to the ordinance. That's a total policy call for you all.
I guess the way I look at this is we're asking people to pay the debt service, correct? So if we're asking people to pay this in order to cover the debt service, and the debt service will remain stable over the next 10 to 15 years, right? It might drop if we refinance, if interest rates go down, right? But for the most part, it would stay stable. Then I'm not sure why we would have to raise it.
Well, because then it means that we can only do that for 10 or 15 years, whatever the life of the bond is. And if we want to accelerate, or if we want to continue the progress that we've started, 50 years seems like a long time.
But how would we accelerate outside of that bond? Like, we have the 400,000,
Do another
right?
bond.
Right, you do another bond, so then you're asking people, we could do another bond, and you're saying we would want to ask people then to cover that portion of the bond?
Yeah, you increase the fee by $100 and you borrow another
Right.
$5 million bond.
Right.
I agree with Barbara that we have to have some, oh, I'm sorry, I've already spoken, go ahead.
No, it's that,
Go ahead.
Oh, you.
So I think at one of the meetings, what was discussed is the reason the 5-year number came up is that we have so many years to spend that bond money, and that being 3 years. So once the bond money is spent, one would assume that you have gone through most project work and expended your expenses, even though you continue to pay it for the 15-year period. So you've gotten the money, you've spent the bond money on the project, and now you're still paying it out for another 10 or 12 years, and you have no more money to continue with the next phase of project. So it would ladder that bond issuance in 5-year increments so that we continue to go forward with work, because you have to spend the money within a certain period of time when you issue bond debt.
Thank you for reminding me of that. You've mentioned that to me more than once, and you can remind me of it again. But that's a very important point. Thank you.
That's really
Yes.
helpful.
Yes, yes, yes.
But even if the village picked a point in time and said, we won't even think about adjusting it, and write that in the recital of the ordinance adopting this until after a 5-year period, but then don't speak to beyond that maintains the flexibility you're describing and the nimbleness to maybe do more, but it does at least address to some degree the resident concern about having some continuity in the fee structure.
I think, the residents perhaps need to, have a level of trust, which I would have thought we would have demonstrated character to have that, but, I think that would help to freeze it for that initial period.
Did we answer this question of fee, governor? Do you guys feel comfortable with that answer?
5 years.
I'm comfortable with 5. I guess I'm just wondering, like, let's say we use up the first bond in 3 years, and now we're like, okay, we want to take another 10 million out, or we want to take another 10 million out, right? So we take another 10 million bond out. Now, are we doubling that fee for people?
We'll address it at the time.
I'm not comfortable.
Well,
at
interest
what
rates
point
will
does that,
determine.
at what point do we say, like,
Are interest rates 10% or are they 2%? I mean, it's gonna,
Right, I'm just saying, is that the mindset we're in?
no, the mindset is to see what we can accomplish in what period of time. And then, once we've done that, we'll have gained knowledge to say, what do we have the capacity to do? What is the logical next big project to take on? What can we learn from area communities that are doing similar things? I won't be here, but I think that the people who will be here will have learned something.
I mean, I don't think we can constrain a future board to not take another bond that might be slightly loosely related to that. I mean,
Right.
there is a measure of responsibility working as volunteers for this community. That is, we actually looked at the conditions very carefully. And I think to Barb or Drew's point, we have to trust that future people will make the right decisions. And in this case, we have to trust that what we did is right also, and just go forward.
Again, I won't be here when that's happening, but I feel like I'm not super comfortable saying like, hey, in 3 years, when we've used up the bond, or 5 years, we could just double that amount if we want. I understand both sides of the story, right? We need the money to do what we need to do, but at the same time, we're not the only taxing body, so, and I'm not super comfortable with that. If we could hold it for 5 years, I think I could manage that.
There's nothing that prevents us from saying, okay, we're done with that bond, let's go and get another bond to build a bridge on top of the train track. And nothing prevents us from starting something humongous somewhere else. It's the same thing. And so it's a matter of board responsibility or fiscal responsibility to only absorb what we can absorb. And I think this is a bad answer by itself, but it's I think as far as we can go, correct?
But how frequently do we set up a new fee schedule for a bond service? It's not, we don't normally do that.
No, you don't.
No, so I mean, normally that's either, that's either amassed in our property taxes, taxes go up just a little bit, or we find it somewhere else in the budget and pay for it. Am I right?
The exception, I think, of the water, the village pledges water funds, and the village regularly updates its water rates, right, to reflect needs for operations and capital, and has been, we've talked about it on the finance committee.
Right.
Every other year, we've had a water rate increase, so.
Right.
It's not this, it's a lot smaller number.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You know, but, that's probably the most direct example I can think of where the village constantly is reexamining its needs and changing rates to reflect that and has borrowed against that and may borrow more against it down the road. This is just a very specific earmarked program around a very specific fee.
Right, and I'm just saying, I don't want that number to get out of control in 5 years, like where all of a sudden we're doubling it. And I understand that the board probably won't do that. I feel like it's important to voice that. I'm clearly the only person who's gonna voice that opinion on this board, but I think it's important to know, like, we need to be cognizant how much residents are paying for other things, and they have this big bucket that they're paying into, right, all different things. And we just need to be cognizant of that.
Joy, I will
You
say,
know,
I really appreciate your sentiment, and I hear you.
yeah.
Well, Joyce, I mean, you have a fine point, and I actually think that you have the right point. The question would be, what leverage and control do we have against that? What can we do to make sure that that we have stated it was not our intent, and that we really don't want that to happen? What can we do to make sure that this does not get out of control?
I'll go back and look in the villages when it did the question of home rule and when it did the I'll go back and look at what was in recitals and how that got addressed about the PTEL restriction, what they did to try to memorialize that commitment.
Okay, I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think it is, but I don't know where, you know, is it in what part? But I think Peter says he thinks it's in the recital, but the commitment about sticking to PTEL, but I piqued my curiosity. I'm very,
Yeah, I don't remember. Maybe it's but it's not in the code.
Yeah.
If anything, it's just in the ordinance, but not in the code.
Thank you, Joy.
Thanks.
Moving forward, keep lobbying.
yeah, I think that is, at least from what I heard from the resident think singular maybe, who wanted to be crystal clear that the village was going to keep chasing money. I think that's something that we can demonstrate in the FAQs, that we know what we're asking for from the state. We can show that as, you know, in these dollars plus these dollars plus these dollars equals project, and show what the expectation is, and that should, I would think, communicate that we're gonna keep pushing for that.
Of all items on that list, this is our commitment, we're gonna go and find the money. I take that as a game. And we have raised 12 or 13 out of 17, 18 for the first phase. We're not done. We do not have the money, and from my standpoint, IDOT and the state have not satisfied the part of the deal. Okay, we did our part, that is $10 million. And guess what? We are going to be lobbying and going back and we will ask for funds. It's not so much of a wish. This is a necessity to do that.
Yeah. Regis, can I ask, and Drew, maybe you know this, is it ever kind of PC to hire a lobbyist to help kind of get this on the radar, or is that a?
Yeah, listen, yes is the answer to that. I think it is, when you get down to this community specific, it gets more difficult. Like if it was just us going hand in hand with another community, I think that has more weight. But the village went out working with Holland and Knight back in the day to secure money for phase 1 dollars to get those federally allocated to complete the 41-176 planning project. And without the village doing that, we'd still be sitting here in pre-phase 1, I suspect. But but that has been done in the past, so it can be done. I think it's one of those things where,
You gotta have a story to tell.
yeah.
That was a story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a bad intersection, so.
Right. Right.
So, but we.
Solving our
could.
stormwater is not as good a story.
Kayaking under
Or
the.
a particular project might be
Picture of the
unique,
kayaker.
deep tunnel, I mean, those things,
story.
they're unique, so that's what you need, like some,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, it's not far-fetched from a lobbying standpoint. Congressman Brad Schneider was stuck here. Okay, it's a fun story and an easy story to say, cannot help us. People.
Same was true of the head of the SMC, the head engineer.
Kurt was also stuck
They were
here.
here when,
Guess what?
can you remind Brad that when you,
He's very sensitive to our need.
yeah.
So the point is, should we engage lobbying? Is that what is on the table?
I think that for the short-term answer to that, I think really depends on the response that we get from our state representatives.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an expense. I mean, it's an expense. Although I don't know how lobbying works. Does it,
Is it like, yeah?
what they get? Yeah. Like,
It's not.
Yeah, it's normally a fee as opposed to a percentage
Right.
of what you get.
Or is it a tax?
That's a good one.
Can we cap it?
So the commitment is, no, we will go and find the money as hard as we can. Drew?
So the getting to the last ones, you know, continuing community engagement. You saw in the emails there was one of the property owners out in the business park. We had met with him, part of the BAC outreach, and we had a relationship. It's actually somebody who lives in town also owns a business out there, and we talked, and he participated in the meeting. Was like, oh, okay, it makes sense that each commercial property is going to get reviewed independently. That makes sense. So I told him that, you know, we'll be reaching out to those folks. I think we should do that in a similar way, like host a meeting, come in, and similar people, if we can get the gang back together again and do it, you know, hey, we're gonna invite people in, please come in, and then do the same with our institutions, the school district, the park district. All of them are understanding it. They know the dollar fee. They're like, hey, just give us time to put this in our budget. That's kind of the feedback we've gotten from them thus far. So I think they're expecting it. So it's really more just communicating to some of these folks out in the business park what they're looking at. And because some, like one of the biggest ones we talk about, Canasta, is going to get some credits because the way their stormwater falls. So I think that seems to be clear that everybody wants to continue doing that. So we'll do that. And then the timeline, I think what it comes down to is to get this to the finish line at the level of detail that everybody thinks it needs to be, and staff certainly agrees with that, means we need to bring back Burke to kind of finish this and get it down to now that we've got the high level, let's get it down to the details. and that engagement, that scope of work. Would you run them through that, please?
Yeah, it's basically to have them look at the commercial properties, do a deeper dive on the residential properties, tighten these numbers up. There was a couple other on that proposal right in front of me, Drew, but they were also gonna, I think, help us with some more meetings.
Additional
some
meetings,
meetings we've
yeah,
already
the
done.
credit policy, finalizing the credit policy.
The credit policy will come, it won't be with the ordinance, but there'll be a credit booklet that kind of describes all the steps and the application forms, and those sort of things would be best if they was developed by them.
Can I ask, is that contract and the fee associated with that contract all from today going forward, or is that for some of the work that they've already done?
It is looking forward.
Yeah.
We had an existing agreement with them that we won't even finish, because it was early
Just to
on.
look at a few things, some of the things we didn't do, so we've been
It was
using
back-
that agreement from, I think, 2021.
Because it was a much bigger number, and it was really looking at like some of the terrace review and some of that engineering and general guidance, and we were still using that, and it was kind of like, we were done with that work, and we said, let's make sure we're clear moving forward, and they wanted to do the same, so.
And our village staff doesn't have either the time or the expertise to do that work. We need a consultant to do it, right? Yeah.
Jeff is very competent, and it's just a
Well,
matter of,
Some of
course,
it's
I didn't-
technology as well,
yeah.
Yeah.
as far as measuring and doing all that kind of work and creating the database. That's, I could do that, but be the only thing I would be doing for the next 2 months.
Right, as we approach spring,
Right.
spring rains, he'll be busy.
So the markings they put on the viaduct already, are those, like, is that part of this then? Have
The
they,
what, excuse me?
there's like spray paint
The
or?
core samples were taken underneath the viaduct.
they already
That
started?
was part of the phase 1 engineering to do soil borings along that route. That was one of those requirements Drew was talking about to make us federally funding eligible, they like soil borings.
There was an essential point during the meeting. I remember angst during the meeting from community residents that was, we want to know the timeline. And so we want to know when things are happening, just to show progress, but people wanted to be aware of what we're going to do next. Would it be possible to refine the timeline and post the timeline on the website as an FAQ or as a document we would have available for the community?
Yes.
Thank you.
But where we talked about probably doesn't make sense is when you get past some of these initial projects, like the deep tunnel, and you start looking at, okay, how do we prioritize the terrace versus Sunset Terrace or some of these other projects, right? Then we said,
No, my request is only for the deep tunnel, for that part that will be highly
First phase,
disruptive.
yeah.
For what we know in the village that is highly disruptive. The rest that is subject to variability, the straws and the east and north terrace, it's a different phase. But for that phase, people were antsy to know when is the shovel on the ground.
there were a handful of residents, I should say 2, that came in and said, we support this, we want this to happen, how can we lobby to be prioritized to be first on the list? So,
Yeah.
okay. I think that's it from a timeline, no, there's not. So here's the kind of the big picture is when, right? We've been talking about this. I think we can get a lot of this information done in getting the policy ready for the booklet and all that, Jeff. How long do you think it takes CB Burke to do that?
Excuse me. The policy booklet, it's probably going to be after, beyond April.
Okay. So one of the things we're talking about is when would the board want to see the ordinance to establish this? Because you could see it, because one of the comments going back several meetings was, is this going to be the board that completes this? Because you could do that and set a target date of like July 1, it's effective that date, thinking that we would have all this other stuff finalized with the finalized policy manual that we can hand out to residents, but that we would know the details of, because we can get the details of these calcs, so we can walk in and show that.
We can get, I was thinking about the question we talked about earlier about the final number.
Yes.
And I was thinking about that after that. A lot of these things are based off a current interest rate. There's a lot of, they look like very specific numbers, but really there's a lot of, we could pick a number that we think is the right number and go with it.
Could we
and
approve a
then,
range?
If you can only bond $9.7 million with that number, who knows what the interest rate will be by the time we get to a bond anyway.
Right.
So I think we can put a number on it, maybe without defining each parcel.
I just want to clear, like, I just don't want that number to come back and be like radically different than what we're looking at. Like, I don't want it to be $50 more or $100 more. So if it's within, you know,
Understood.
$10 or
That's exactly what George Russell told me. He said, you put this number out there, don't come back, 50%.
I think it's important within the tenure of this board to get this done. I mean, Barbara's worked so hard. Everybody has, but Barbara has been a leader on the finance committee and attended all of the meetings, and I would very much like to see it happen within the tenure of this board.
I think it is fair, absolutely. Are there more questions on the board regarding?
So to be clear, so I think from a staff perspective, a reasonable time to do that would bring it the first meeting in April, probably working with legal.
Bring something. We can't, Christopher Burke's contract will have to, I think, come to the board March. When's our meeting in March? March
We
13th?
meet, once in March.
So then we can maybe get them to work a little ahead off our existing contract, but
I think we've been a great client.
I'd like to get them moving as fast as we can. But like I said, I think we can refine the numbers and pick an ERU. And like I said, we're not going to be able to define every single commercial or CBD or real property. This is exactly what your fee is going to be. But we'll have one ERU equals 3,200 square feet, and one ERU costs this, and then the final calcs will come.
Thank you.
So if, that doesn't give us enough time, right? So we're here the first week in April for the first
The
reading?
first meeting in April is first reading, second meeting in April will be the second reading. This board would have one more meeting. The first meeting in May is the changeover. So there's-
Okay.
It's tight, but it's
Yeah.
probably the best
Gotta have
we're gonna
quorum.
do. It's the best we're gonna do.
Can we do another special meeting?
You can, but it's just a matter of, I don't know if you would wanna
That's
do
good.
something special in between.
How about this March meeting upcoming? It's normally it's not possible to do it by
We
following.
have a
Monday.
draft ordinance, but the refinements, the level you're describing to get it, I mean, I think we could probably present these numbers and it's probably plus or minus, it's really close.
5%.
Yeah. That's up to you, how comfortable you are passing something on first reading.
We'd have second reading to refine it, right, or no?
And I guess that's a different approach you could do, again, assuming Village Attorney Friedman could get it done in that short. But you could do it and hold second reading purposely to garner more comment, have like a period, like we're holding a time frame. We've approved first reading. If you see something, this is where it is to date, here's all our information, let us know. We've already reached out to you once, we're reaching out again, let us know. And our intent is, if we don't hear anything differently, we'll consider it for its final time on this date. You can do that too. If
That makes sense to me. I'm committing you to stuff, though, so.
More Peter Friedman.
Oh, Peter, well, lawyers,
No lawyers.
That's what associates are for.
Pretty much everybody in this room looked at each other with that one except me. Lawyers.
All right, more questions around the table? Kat, Darren, Barb.
So is that the consensus to do first reading at the next meeting and hold it? Is that, yeses, all right.
Sure.
Get it done. Are there any more subjects to discuss? Are we done?
That's it.
Motion to adjourn?
So could I
Oh, I'm
please
sorry,
have a
I'm sorry,
motion
hold-
to
let me-
adjourn?
Let me double check there, if there's somebody participating publicly that has a comment. Sorry. All right, so there is somebody, so you want to ask if there's-
Sure, so if we have, it appears that we have community members online. Do we have a question from the community? And if so, please raise your hand and you will be
Permitted to speak.
permitted to speak. Thank you very much.
So one more time, if you are participating virtually on our Zoom call and you would like to ask a question or make a comment, now is the great time to do so. And signal by raising your hand, please, and you can be given a chance to speak. No one.
All right. And I believe we're done. Could I please have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Thank you.
Second.
Second.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Cute.
Nifty.